Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 125 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And this week, joining us to talk about Mistweaver Talents, we've got Drezington.
Hello. Glad to
Uh,
be here.
yeah, so this is exciting. We've got the Mistweaver spec tree that we're going to be talking about today, along with maybe some updates to the monk class tree that we also saw. We have
Yep.
all of the talents are actually in there now. There's no more placeholders. Not everything is implemented yet, but we do know what that third capstone in monk class tree is now. Um, but before we get into that, and Mel, you want to do a quick raid week recap?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we were back in faded Nathria, so basically have restarted the rotation. And got some, we'll say, better affixes or better affixes on the fight. So the fights they did rotate what affixes were on each fight, which I think maybe surprised some. Like some people in my raid didn't know this was happening.
Yeah,
I thought this was pretty
I mean
well known in terms of like.
when they called them affixes, I think the assumption a lot of people had was that they would rotate like Mythic Plus affixes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think yeah. So I mean, in any event, people were confused, but we had some better, we'll say better affixes this week. And had a pretty clean raid week. Like we killed everything up to Sire on Tuesday, and then did our jailer mount farm, which I got the mount, which is super exciting. I can quit the game
Congrats.
now.
Grats.
Dragonflight. Thank you. Yeah, I'm done. It's the only thing I care about in this game are mounts. So we're done with the game for a little bit. But no, it was a really clean week. We didn't end up killing Mythic Sire. Primarily probably just because I think you were like when we were talking pre-show. We just don't like most of our raid is new-ish also. So we just didn't want to put the
Yeah,
time in. It's like gear wise, it's like whatever. Like there's what the trinket's really good in from there from him and other than that, it's just not worth it to spend, a couple hours. So we blasted heroic for an hour at the end of the night, and yeah, it was a raid. It was an easy raid week. Still some bugs. So,
Creation
uh,
Spark,
yeah,
continuing to cause problems. They did nerf that this week, getting a little bit ahead of myself, but they did nerf it. There's now 2
yep,
soaks instead of 3. The damage from missing a soak is reduced by 30%, but that's not really the real issue with it. The real issue is that there's creation sparks on Sire Nathrius, and they should just ban this affix from end bosses. To be frank, they should just ban this affix from end bosses. So it interacts negatively with Night Hunters in phase 1. They go off faster. In fact,
yep,
because you have, what is it, plus 55% or 110% if you've got 2 stacks of the Creation Spark buff, it in fact goes off 110% faster, which
yeah,
gives you significantly less time to have people get in your soak.
I am so happy I'm not raiding.
yeah. It's the
That sounds
sparks are
awful.
they screw up timings on everything. Yeah. So,
The spark,
um,
the soak mechanic on the sparks is also just really bad. It's the only affix that like is actually really difficult to have apply to the whole raid. Everything else like just applies to the whole raid for free.
yeah. You have to soak it, and then like I mean, even when we were doing council, like we had to stagger dispels, and there's so much that you take into account of like
Yeah.
we can't dispel right away because we have a recital coming up, so people are going to be moving, and then when we do dispel, like we dispelled once right after recital, but then the people that dance around on council came down
Yes.
on top of where sparks were landing, and like we lost a person. It's like
Yeah.
you can't outplay that affix. It's awful. Although I will say for Council of Blood, still bugged, 0 after images
Yeah.
on Mythic.
It's a
Still,
feature now. 2 rotations, it's a feature.
yeah, they're not gonna fix that. But
Um yeah, I'm happy about that one though. It makes the Castle Blood's not a good fight either, so I'm happy for it to be easier. Um
yeah,
so yeah. Similar story on our side. We actually did our mount farm on Friday, so we only got up through Sludgefist, but we are doing SLG and pulling Sire Denathers tonight. We actually cannot field a full 20-player roster that has already killed Mythic Sire or even pulled Mythic Sire prior to this. So we are not expecting to kill him. Um, we are not expecting to kill him, which is kind of shitty because we're gonna have 2 to 3 hours on the boss probably. given
Yeah.
how SLG is typically going for guilds. So kind of definitely in
Look,
that weird space between it not being a farm tier for sure, but also not a full progression tier. But we're definitely like tonight is progression on Sire Denathrius. We are progressing Mythic Sire Denathrius so that in 3 weeks we hopefully will have remembered enough of it to actually kill it.
so yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting for your prediction of they'll massively nerf this
Dude,
tier or these sort of faded raids, but
yeah.
I think at this point they're pretty much done with nerf. Like
I do
unless we see some more weird stuff this week in Sanctum and like
yeah.
and eventually back in Sepulcher, but I think they're pretty much this is it
I
for
I think we are going to see more changes to Creation Spark soon.
yeah,
Just
just let
because
it
it's just the hardest one. It is the only affix that genuinely makes the fights harder.
yeah. 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 But other than that, I mean the raid week wasn't too terrible. It's definitely I will say that with the eye level increase over the first week, I mean we flew through the front half of Mythic and so
Yeah.
it definitely feels um like we now have a Mythic farm type set of pulls, at least for the
Yeah.
early bosses,
It
right?
definitely was something the first rotation people were like, "Oh no, we're not going to gain that much from gear because there's no tier sets and there's no this and that and we're already like eye level 290 because of Mythic Plus and blah 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 blah."
Yeah.
And turns out that like between the 5% HP nerf just across the board
Yep.
and people getting, 10-15% stronger from gear, everything falls over. Turns out when the whole
Yeah.
raid loses effectively 20% health and all of your raiders gain an extra 20% health, like
It's pretty
you
easy.
kind of blast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was a fun week for sure. So but yeah, we'll see how Sanctum goes coming up. We'll get more, probably see Mythic Sylvanas this week. And see how
Yeah,
that goes. But
we're gonna have to decide between doing probably Mythic Sylvanas or Mythic Painsmith. Um,
two bad choices.
we
Two
actually
terrible
so we had like a
choices.
2% wipe on Mythic Painsmith last time, which will not be like if they had
Yeah.
if we had raided Monday, we would have had the 5% faded HP nerf, and
Oh
yeah, we would
yeah.
have killed it. But we're not Monday raiders, so
Unlucky.
Yeah. Um but cool. But I mean that's so we'll definitely check in I think next week with more of that raid stuff. I mean I will say that in general the faded raids are fun more than frustrating, where I thought I'd be more frustrated with them after the first rotation, but
yeah,
coming back in a second time, it's been nice just to for it to be a little bit easier, a little bit more loose,
yeah.
sort of playing through it. So
It's also like Creation Spark is more frustrating than fun on the end bosses, but is very fun on the early bosses. So it's like very by like
yeah,
divided. Like on the early bosses, it's really easy to do. You just like
Mhm.
dispel it and then you soak it and then you do like a bajillion damage.
right,
But then on the end bosses, you're like struggling to find good times to do the dispels, and it kind
yeah,
of sucks. But there's also like the kick one was a little bit of an issue the first time around, just because people were losing track of it.
hmm
And this time around we have weak auras for it, so it's a complete non-factor.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It was not too bad at all. Um, so cool. Well, I mean, a couple of quick news posts, and then we'll get into the big part of the discussion, the Mistweaver tree. So there's a couple of hot fixes. I'm not gonna touch on it. We already talked about the Creation Spark hot fix, right? They reduced the number of
Yeah,
puddles you got to soak from 3 to 2 on the dispels. Reduce the damage of the if you miss it, the dot that raid gets. So quality of life change there. The 2 soaks makes it a ton easier, I think, in terms of just at least having some coverage
right.
on that. They did make another couple passes on some Mythic Plus, lower Karazhan. Got another round-ish of changes after last week's destroying of that place.
Yep.
Which I think, to be fair, the one thing I think Blizzard potentially takes from this going into like with the assumption that they'll do this again at the end of Dragonflight, right? Of like maybe bringing back sort of silly season, or even though
Yeah.
they're starting this in Dragonflight, right? For the dungeons are
Right.
going to be old
Yeah.
Mythic Plus dungeons.
Right.
Yeah, I think what they'll need to do is be a little bit more proactive in what they do from a hotfix perspective, or as a community, us just be okay with them making changes every week. I think it's probably going to be a little bit of both. Them
Yeah.
being a little bit more proactive and us just being aware that they're going to make changes. I think the problem now is that we've asked for changes for so long. Where like Blizzard will spend an entire season doing nothing. That when they
Right.
make changes every week, now it's quote unquote a joke, but it's actually good that they're paying attention, right? And
Yeah.
like updating things and like seeing where folks maybe are having difficulty and
Right.
making changes to it. So
It is important for
um,
Lower Karazhan in particular to remember that when we did this in Legion, like 70% of the specs had an AoE stun. And you could
yeah,
just like go nuts with AoE stops on every
Mhm.
pull in a pug.
hmm
So that meant that Lower Kara, a lot of these things where they're removing casts or changing them um, weren't an issue because you just stunned it. Because you just had a stun. Because like leg sweep was what, 45 seconds? Leg sweep's one of the
yeah.
few that survived the AoE stun purge.
Yeah.
Warriors no longer have their AoE stun. Demon Hunters still have theirs. There's like 3 others that existed that are no longer present. So,
Mhm.
And Warlock just took all of them and just stun on cooldown
yep,
like a pack 6 times. And you're like,
yep,
oh, this pack has no mechanics. Why is this so challenging?
yeah, yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So, there are changes to the game itself, like to the classes, that change how difficult the dungeon is.
Mhm.
I think the big one for there was the whole fact that they just removed an entire mechanic from Huntsman or whatever his name
Yeah,
is.
Oh yeah.
Um, where back in the day, I don't remember it being that awful to see. There's just something about like maybe it's because I was playing with a Frost DK this entire season, but trying to see it on a Frost DK is
yeah,
impossible.
yeah,
You're just like, there's blue everywhere. I don't know what's going on.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I don't remember it like yeah, because I mean I healed back then and too, and like yeah, I don't remember it being as big of an issue. I remember it being like a little bit of a if you're in a pug, a little bit hairy in terms of like as a
yeah,
healer trying to get it done
yep.
quickly,
Yeah.
right? But it never was like to the point of like, oh man, this is awful. They should remove this. So
I think they
um
removed it because of the weak aura. For those that maybe missed it, there was a weak aura. Apparently, when you got the actual debuff that needed dispelling, but not the one that didn't need dispelling, it fired like a vehicle event. And so this
oh
weak
okay.
aura would watch for the vehicle event during
It
attunement.
also only worked though if the entire
Right.
party had it.
And
Otherwise, it would only work between people that shared it. So if Anomoly got it, I couldn't tell that he had it unless we both had the weak aura,
right.
which made
Um,
it mandatory, which
yes.
is what Blizzard doesn't want.
Yeah. And so I think that's why they removed it. I don't think it was like too difficult. I think it's that people found a way to trivialize it with a weak aura, but the weak aura only worked if everybody has it. And so you would
Gotcha.
go into a pug, and the first question for lower care would be, "Do you have the weak aura?" And they would rather just remove it.
That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, that was yeah, they've been making a ton of changes to that dungeon, so a couple more this week, bug fixes too. So the other big, I guess, change or hotfix this week was the ring from what is it, Court of Stars, right?
Yeah.
So there's a ring from Court of Stars that basically reads increase like when you equip it, it increases your auto attack damage by an amount.
Yes.
Um, and that ring was apparently really good because it, affected all like more than just your white swings um
Yeah.
in terms of abilities, right? So it affected more than just, that part of the ability. So rather than, go in and fix it, they just nerfed the hell out of this ring. But it was best in slot for pretty
Didn't
much
they
any
actually fix it?
melee class.
I thought they actually fixed it. Maybe they didn't. Yeah.
No, no,
Okay.
the functionality didn't change. They just brought the tuning way down. So
Yeah, to the point where you wouldn't want it really.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think maybe
Yes.
only like rogues might use it still.
Okay. Yeah.
I
I
saw something on
misunderstood the
Twitter
hotfix.
about it, but
Yeah.
who
Mhm.
knows if that's out of date or not.
So basically, the situation is that if you are a melee spec, your weapon damage gets converted into attack power for determining your spell damage. So if you cast Keg Smash, that is based not only off of your attack power that comes from agility and from your mastery, it
Mm-hmm.
also comes from your weapon DPS. So this ring increasing your weapon DPS was increasing not your weapon like actual auto attacks by 10%. It was increasing your weapon DPS by 10%, which was then buffing all of your spells. So it was actually significantly better
Yeah.
by by a ton. Like it effectively was just 10% damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's now gone. So a lot of people excuse me, are a little upset because I spent weeks or basically all week in weeks if you're EU, but
Yeah.
all week if you're NA in old quarter stars to get
So
one.
it is
So
important to note that we didn't figure this out. Like Kojiyama, who's actually in my guild, hi Koji, uh, figured this out after quarter stars went away. So if you were EU, you actually still had quarter stars and could still farm it after this got
Mhm.
figured out. But if you were NA, the dungeon was already gone. And the numbers prior to figuring out this bug with the item were way, way, way lower, on the order of like a 1% gain for a lot
Mhm.
of specs, which means that honestly, like a lot of people didn't bother farming it because it's just not that good. And it means that you can't run the Mechagon sets, which are just easier to acquire because the dungeons are always here.
Mhm.
yeah.
Um, so a bunch of people in NA were complaining after it came out that this ring was like way better than it was supposed to be, that they hadn't farmed it because it wasn't supposed to be that good.
Right. Yeah. So I mean the ring itself nerfed, no longer an issue, but it was fun for a couple days, we'll say. Um
Yeah.
before they got that fixed. Um So cool. I guess then one final news thing and then we can start talking about the main thing is there was an interview this week with Max and Ian. And I don't think we'll be able to go over the whole interview, but a couple of I guess highlights we'll say. And if you guys have any, chime in. But I sort of cherry picked a couple of highlights from the interview, which was number one, um, Ian did mention that there are discussions going on about adding another BRez to a class.
Yep.
Ian mentioned Paladin as a potential option. People are freaking out that I saw literally 30 seconds later a Reddit post. It was like Paladin getting B-Res and Dragonflight. I'm like, it's not exactly what Ian said at all. But no, it's looking like there'll be another B-Res class out there, which will be, I mean, I guess interesting, right? Like right now it's sort of
Mhm.
three. You have warlocks, druids, and DKs. So adding another one, not a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I agree with Paladin being the one to get it, but whatever they pick, they'll probably do it for thematic reasons over
Yeah.
what's else in their kit.
It's also
So
like I know you guys have this like endless crusade against holy paladins,
yeah,
which is
yeah, they're bad. They're bad this tier, and I fucking love it. By the way,
yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Um, this would actually be a nice bit of utility for protection paladins. One of the things with protection paladin is their utility is very kind of on off. Sometimes the immunes are amazing, but Blizzard has been pretty good over the past several tiers at just making it so immunes don't work on things. So
hmm
Yeah.
their utility is kind of absent. Um, so them bringing a battle res as well would be a nice little thing for protection paladin. Also, is something that like retribution paladin currently has no utility to speak of, except for bubble. So
Freedom, sack. Come on,
all right, they've
those
got
are
freedom.
things.
op.
Sack is the kill yourself button.
You sack and then you use whatever their stupid defensive is,
Their
divine
version of
shield.
Shield of
karma is or
vengeance.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The one thing I would say about it is maybe it just like bugs me from a like dispersion of this utility stuff. Like two
Hmm.
male class or all three male classes having bloodlust seems like oddly redundant to me. Like give one of them a battle res, even though
Mhm.
shaman has battle res, but it's this weird workaround of it's a cooldown and a talent you need to take.
Yeah,
Where I maybe it doesn't make sense for paladin to get hero, but no other male class has that. So that would be kind of neat for them to have. You don't have to bring a mage. You don't have to bring, you know, uh, a hunter, that sort of thing. Like maybe that's a direction they go with it. They give a leather user Lust because there's already 2 male users with Lust right now. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
from that
Yeah.
like
So that's what's
dispersion,
that?
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's what bugs me the most about this whole like DKs and Pallies might both have battle res. Less so that like Monk doesn't get it. It's more just like maybe give it to a different leather type or
Yeah.
armor type.
I think there's a limited pool of classes that it would make thematic sense to give it to,
Yeah.
right? It's like you're basically looking at the classes that have heal specs, right? So it's
Hunter
either go
used to have it though. That'd be the one argument I'd give back in
yeah,
Legion, right? With their
that was
resin crane
dumb.
pet.
I'm just
Mm,
good at like that was dumb. That
it was so
was
good.
like your crane pet being able to res made no sense. Like,
That's true.
okay, there was
GG
like
stocks are high.
there is the Kieran. You can get a Kieran pet, right? Like that makes a little bit more sense. But that's an exotic pet, which means only BM hunter.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the crane was like the non-BM answer to that, and
But
it's
by
just
Cranes being able to use it and Mistweavers having invoke
oh my
Chi-Ji,
god.
therefore Mistweaver should get battle res. And we
Ah,
just like
That's
teach the rest
yes.
of the monks how to do it,
Yeah, and also teach the hunter pets how to do it.
Yeah.
yeah.
The hunter
Sure. If we
pets
get it, that'd be cool.
hunter crane pets can battle res, but only with a Mistweaver in the party.
Yeah. They're invoking our powers for their pet to do it.
Yes.
So they can
Yes.
res us when we die to a mechanic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That'd be funny. But yeah, so I mean they're talking. I guess the other thing too that Ian did mention is invokers, which I think you hinted at, Drez, is invokers are getting bloodlust in the next alpha build. So that's confirmed at least the battle res piece, other than another battle res coming for some class. We don't know which class is getting it, but Ian did mention Paladin, so we'll see there.
That one sort of just feels like they're throwing more stuff at it so people will play it and try it. It's almost like how Demon Hunters were just so busted in Legion when they first
Right.
like
Yeah.
were fully implemented that it's just so people do adopt it. And then after that they might prune some stuff back. But like maybe it never hits it to live and they just have it for this one alpha cycle so
Yeah.
that you don't have to build a group on alpha around having a lust in it. You can be playing all these new different changed classes and just have the lust in your
Right.
party.
There's
Yeah.
also that from a practical rating standpoint, Evoker is going to be what they are saying is medium ranged. So it's not
Yeah.
the full 40-yard range. So it's going to be a really awkward spot, I think, for rating. I don't think that applies so much to keys, but I think for rating, that's a big drawback. So we'll
From the
see.
healer aspect, for sure. DPS, like you can kind of play in whatever range you really want to, and like avoid stuff if you need to.
It limits things like, let's take Sledge Fist as an example. If you get if you're an Evoker and you get chained to whoever is baiting the chain slam, then the whole range group has to move up, or you have to stop DPSing in order to go back and bait the chain slam.
Yeah, I'm sure like it would almost be like how they address some fight mechanics with like what Revival does and doesn't dispel currently.
Right.
Like they'd probably do something like that with Evokers and just say like, oh, it's always considered melee for this mechanic.
Yeah.
So it's at least more playable than what you're saying. Like if the intended strat becomes the whole bait aspect of it, like Sledgefist, and Sledgefist is one of the only fights I can think of in history that has something so divisive like that. Like what
Yeah,
group
that's
you're
true.
considered in. Where
Yeah.
like if you're a monk and you're playing out in range for some reason, it like completely changes your ability to play the fight if you want to be ranger monk instead
Right.
of properly playing the class, but whatever.
I like that. Yeah. So I guess we'll see more. Over the next couple cycles, see what other new stuff comes in. Because it sounds like they're doing a little bit more than just these talent trees. They're sort of adding some utility to each of the classes. So
It'd be cool if somebody else got lock cookies and
And
gave
gateway and summoning
Gateway.
and soul stones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you could find some thematic way to spread that out, I don't know what it is. Like
Okay.
who the
Mage.
maybe monks because
summoning.
we have
No,
ports.
sorry.
We drop down our ports. They
Yeah.
can take it. They
So
can take where our
Death
ports
Knights
are.
get summons because they've already got Deathgate. They're like halfway there.
Yeah.
Mages get cookies because they already can make the mana food. And soul stones.
Evoker. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say Evoker can get port because they already are moving time and space stuff thematically.
Yeah. Okay. I could see
I
that
could
being a
also see
mage
druids
thing as
getting
well.
I could see
Oh.
druids getting lock cookies, some version of it. They're
Yeah.
like force feeding you some leaves. Like they just prepare like a salad and you like eat it. I don't, or a tonic of some kind.
Yeah,
True.
yeah. Monks getting the soul stone. Your celestial just comes in and reses the nearest healer.
Yeah.
Anytime our celestials get more face time, I'm for it. I don't even
Or no,
care
even
which
better.
one.
Bam Lu shows up, dunks on you for dying like a moron, and then
That'd be
reses your
sweet.
healer.
Some line about too many mana buttons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting for sure.
But I'm glad they are trying to open up these raid utilities to more classes. Like he touched on in the discussion, like doing scrolls to offset buffs might not be something that they get back to doing,
Yeah.
but at least spreading things out. So like it just seems like every tier you end up with like, oh, warlocks are insane because they bring so much damage and so much other stuff to the plate that
Yeah.
other classes can't compete. And the stuff that like mage has, which is on the same armor type, is like lust. Oh, but shaman brings that.
Yeah.
You have an item to semi replace it. Not really, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
With the
it'd be cool
drums
if
nerf is
stuff's
not
more
really
spread
a
out.
replacement for raid, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also just on a practical standpoint, there's as long as they keep putting the like respawn points a million miles away from the raid bosses, it is not practical to raid without a warlock. You are going to spend half of your progression time just waiting for somebody to run back and res the raid, or waiting
That
for the whole raid to run back.
and dungeon graveyards are just so
Yeah,
I hate what they did in Shadowlands,
yeah,
and like going back and playing Kara, like lower Kara, at least when you die after the first boss, which is sometimes part of your strat, you can go a completely different direction because like more of the dungeons open up to you. I'm
right.
fine with them doing that with Essential Grave Point, but something like Mists, if you don't have a Night Fae, like you're just like, oh, I guess we just have to run through all the trash we used in Invis to skip anyways again because
Yeah,
somebody died and can't get back to the party because there's no graveyard near us.
yeah,
Yeah.
Cool.
that sucks. That really sucks. And they're doing more of that in Dragonflight, like the
Yeah.
Oldemon dungeon that you need a miner for, or you have to like commit bloodlust to killing a rock. Pretty neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool, yeah. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see about the utility aspect if they take it any further. But right now, just really mentioning, lost to invokers and then BRez to someone new.
Probably
Uh
Pally.
yeah, probably Paladin. You mentioned it. The other thing too is Ian did touch on communication. Basically, with the idea that, there have been a couple classes that are sorely underrepresented in terms of communication from the developers, other ones that are overrepresented, like hunters, and their weekly blue posts, which I don't think they got one this week, although
They did.
demon hunters did. Hunters got one?
Hunters
Hunters
got one.
actually got one?
Yeah.
Cool.
Or at least Hunters got
But yeah,
changes. I don't know if they got a blue post, but they got changes.
yeah. So Ian did touch on it, and I think he mentioned the fact that like we might not be able to give full feedback, but even something as simple as like, we hear you, something's coming soon, potentially something you start seeing. So we'll see if
Yeah.
that changes. I mean, this is something we've always talked about Blizzard's just historically very bad at the communication side of things. And they've gotten, I'll say this cycle better, but it's better in pockets where like it doesn't seem like it's a group like like WoW team initiative to do it. It's like two or three developers that are just very highly engaged or want to be highly engaged with the community have sort of
Right.
taken the reins of saying, yep, I'm going to post everything, or I'm going to take the initiative to do this. So
Yeah.
shout out to Reels and Skarsgård, to be fair. Those two devs are sort
Yeah.
of crazy good at that part of it. So
Hopefully, it's a case of somebody setting the example, like breaking what the status quo was, and other
yeah.
pockets are going to be like, oh, the community, as for the most part, does like hearing from us and what we're thinking through, instead
Yeah.
of
Yep.
just getting stuff dropped and us having to piece it together.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I guess Ian did touch on it, like, hey, we're going to try and do this more. And particularly calling out druids and priests is information soon, which I think, other than their initial drop of here's your talent tree, there's been zero communication in either of those
Yeah.
classes, which,
Yeah. Priests
um,
still waiting on their power word update. They did get a blue post.
yeah,
It was telling them that they were working on a quote power word update, which they have
yeah,
yet to receive.
exactly.
That's
So,
awesome.
I think that's what happens when your developer leaves the company. I'll be completely honest with you.
Okay,
But
fair enough.
we'll move on
Fair
from that.
enough.
So that's that. And then the only other final thing from the interview I wanted to touch on was basically actually a question Ian posed to Max, which was what would the community's feelings? So really just a community question of what would the community's feelings be about a simultaneous release of normal, heroic, and mythic all at the same time instead of this sort of gap that we have today, which is you'll get normal and heroic for a week, and then the following week we'll get mythic. So Max didn't really, I mean, from Max's point of view as a world first raider, basically just limits what they'll do in terms of like splits and things like that.
Right.
To be fair, I don't think it will. I think you'll still see crazy amounts of splits from them. I think
Oh,
the difference is they're now going to shove them into 1 week versus
yeah.
shoving them into 2.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like we still saw a bunch of splits for specific items, in the second week this time. And I think you'll continue to see that even if everything's released in 1 week. From my point of view as a, world 500 raider, I think it's a good change. To be fair, like I will say that, looking back on our heroic progression, we basically cleared all of heroic other than the last boss within our raid time, pretty much the first week anyway.
Right.
And then we did kill the last boss in like extra time, which for us is just like if you're on a Friday night and we have 10 people, we'll go. If we don't, it's like
Yeah.
not a big deal.
Yeah.
So I mean, for us, it wouldn't change what we do because we're still going to spend time in heroic anyway. The first week just for gear.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know your thoughts. I mean, it seems like if the only nice part about this is the ability to get early boss loot from like the 2 or 3 mythic bosses that are just generally easier than the end bosses of heroic.
Yeah.
And so you sort of accelerate that part of the grind slightly by a week, right?
With continuation of the Great Vault system, like being able to get 2 early bosses like this tier, obviously tuning was way higher, but Skolex and Vigilant Guardian, if you could clear those week 1, that's a mythic vault slot that somebody gets.
Right.
I don't think this would be a great idea because for like looking at our stuff this year, looking at how we went about getting tier sets, we were doing heroic for like a month, which is way longer than normal because heroic was just way more valuable. It was actually would have been a negative to have a mythic vault slot on week 1 because you couldn't get tier in your mythic vault slot because you hadn't killed the boss yet. It dropped the tier.
The bosses with tier, yeah.
Right.
So there's that, but also just like heroic week is us learning the raid. We aren't getting on PTR as a guild and like going through the PTR testing as a guild and figuring it out. We're learning it, the basics of the fight in heroic. And having this thing where like mythic is also that week just puts the pressure on of like, well, we should do heroic and then we have to do the thing where like we skip some of the end bosses and go do early mythic bosses or things like that. And I'd rather just do heroic on the first week.
I think, like, to your point, it's nice as a instead of the hard heroic bosses, which might actually be untuned or tuned in some unfair way week 1,
Yeah.
which we normally see happen, that you can just then go in, jump in, do a couple mythic bosses that are a bit easier on fights you've already done on heroic. So
Yeah.
if you're doing it in that way linearly, it feels nice from a progression standpoint. But from a gear acquisition standpoint, as you pointed out with the vault, it might jank some things up.
Yeah.
But that was partially offset by like you could also get tier from Mythic Plus,
Yeah.
right? So that it reduces your chances by 1, but it's not like you only have 3 shots at it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you do then have the opportunity to trade some stuff that is looted later on in heroic, even the end
That
tier
is
bosses. When you
true.
get
That is
back
true.
to it in heroic, you could trade that around depending how slots line up.
And I think Sepulcher is a very weird tier to look back on for this because of how miserable the tuning was. Like, Vigilant Guardian was not practical for most guilds to pull on Tuesday of the first week. You needed more gear. You needed tier. And then after it got nerfed, it became much more practical. But if you look at like Sanctum, it would have been very practical to skip doing Mythic or Heroic Sylvanas and go do Mythic Terragru, the Eye, the Nine, even Remnant with the gear you got from your first Heroic clear.
The only other part I wanted to touch on this, because I've helped work with the BDGG team on the World First Race stuff, the past or this entire expansion. Like, it would be nice in the sense of having them out at the same time, that if they need a break from like the mythic progression, they could just immediately jump into heroic week one. And this is all
Yeah,
happening when everything is new.
right.
So we have the opportunity to like build on the fights and teach people more about the fights in like a lower risk environment than like
Yeah,
endlessly pulling a boss. And a lot of viewers that come in are only watching for the mythic stuff, right? So they might not actually know all the mechanics and know the difference between mythic and heroic, but that's where you
right.
can take the opportunity to explain things. So I do like it
Yeah,
from
Mhm.
that perspective, but it does make like everything sort of like Blizzard has to decide, which they never do, like what do they care about the most,
yeah,
like the actual end game and what the community ends up being interested in the first like 3 weeks, or gear acquisition for most of the groups, or making it terrible on the high end people. Like, no
yeah,
matter what decision they take, there's a pro and con to it. It's the same thing that happened with Master Loot, which the community is still divided about. A lot of
yeah,
people that are in serious raiding guilds are like, we love Master Loot. If you're a healer, you're like, Master Loot sucks, I never get any
Yeah.
loot. Right?
Yeah.
So there's always going to be a good and bad of these things. I fall on like, I think it would be interesting to have it all open at the same time, because it'd be interesting to see if you can actually slam some bosses slightly under geared on Mythic.
yeah,
Like, instead of having all the heroic gear and your power level increase, that's part of what makes the first couple bosses a walkover in
yeah,
some tiers.
yeah. And I think it also depends, like, again, on your acquisition. Like, it was just correct for us to continue doing heroic well past the point that we normally would, skipping over
Mhm.
mythic for a lot of it. Not entirely, but like only doing the first 2 or 3 bosses to get a little bit of gear from that, and instead doing heroic clears all the way up to Raglan. We actually didn't ever kill heroic jailer in main raid ever.
What
Just
what
just for
else
tier
I'd like to
shots.
see if they did something with this is just to not cap Valor and Conquest and all that. Like, the way the system started this expansion, at least with Valor, made it really nice that if I don't want, or if I do want to grind outside of raid hours, I can have some benefit instead of being capped at like half an upgrade in the
Yeah,
week,
I think
because you can't even get
capping
max
it.
score.
I think capping it would be good. I think capping it would be good. I think the cap on a regular season is way too low. Like you said, half an upgrade a week feels really bad.
Yeah.
Um, you should be able to like at least take a single +15 item all the way to the max from your Valor every week if you max it out.
Oh, yeah, as long as it's not like weapons, I do understand because you have to dump so much more into it. So maybe they don't make the cap like 3K a week,
Yeah,
because that also is just a lot of content to do. But
yeah,
there needs to be something that better lines up with
right,
what I can do with all the grinding I'm doing in M plus, that reflects like the power level I should be gaining
right,
if I killed this, not the same amount, but like put the same amount of effort into heroic.
right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and also Catalyst being out sooner is huge.
Yeah, that it was a nice change. As somebody that didn't do any mythic bosses and like maybe one heroic with OE, because I got carried through it and that was awesome. Besides that, like, I've gotten all my gear from Mythic Plus and I've converted it. That
Yeah,
feels so awesome for a player that doesn't want to raid or doesn't have the time to raid.
right.
So something like that system should come back. And they even touched on the tokens coming back in, or it's like something that they're looking at bringing back, not
Right,
in the
the
same
dinar from this
capacity.
season.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
dinar,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
which are all, I think those are all great things to give players more choices about how they want to spend their time in game.
yeah,
Like, we've shown we will spend the time in game if you put a reason for us to do it.
yeah. I think there's also, um, rather than them opening everything up week one, like if they were to pick one change to make to the raid structure for Mythic, I would rather them change the lockout system. And I know Max actually also covered this with Ian, and Ian's answer was, so you want to do more splits, and then went on this thing about how they see Mythic as a commitment. They want you to do it with a committed group, and they don't want that to
Right.
change really. Um, there's a very real practical issue with that, and it is that like if you're in a group that is normally above 20 and you have people that post out, even if you're at 22, 23 people on your roster, you can end up below 20 for a raid night. And as soon as that happens, raid team's probably dead.
Yeah.
There's just that hard cutoff, and you can't get somebody else in very easily because if they are capable of doing mythic raiding, they're probably already doing it. They're probably already saved, or have to not get saved to your lockout so that they can go theirs later in the week. So you're limited to alts pretty much.
Building off your point too, let's say you, like normally you have like 3 to 4 extra bench players is what most raid teams aim for those post out reasons. If they are pure bench players, they're never going to see the time on fights when they need to be brought in to do them. Their only
Yeah,
experience is going to be heroic. So by opening it up a bit more, those players then have enough. Oh, my raids already happened this week for my main guild.
yeah,
Where can I bring this tune to now? Like, are there groups that need players? Like, you can then go and learn the fights.
yeah,
Obviously, that's like more of an idealistic world where everybody's getting time in on fights and stuff, but like in some capacity. So like that's the advantage of it. But I do see like the point Ion was making about it. Like it also, if you're able to just jump in and out of fights and you're only locked to that boss, but not an entire lockout, then you can just drop groups if like stuff's not going easy in the first 2 pulls, which is basically what happens in heroic and normal and stuff like that. If people don't know mechanics, you're just like, okay, this is a waste of my time, right?
yeah.
So there's pros and cons to it again.
It's also like I stopped trying to do mythic pugs on my alts. It's just a huge hassle for what frequently happens. Like Ian was like, you know, if you are in a mythic pug and you're already safe to that lockout, that gives you a reason to stick around and stick it out and try and kill the next boss or whatever. And
Mhm.
having spent way too much time trying to do mythic pugs, let me tell you, Ian Hazzikostas, that's not a real piece of friction. People will give you, maybe they give you, instead of giving you 1 pull on Skull-X, they give you 4 pulls on Skull-X, and then the group falls apart because your healer left and nobody wants to join a 1 of 11 mythic sepulcher lockout.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I guess not to cut this conversation off short, but we still have
We
the
still have
Mistweaver tree
Mistweaver
to talk
Talents,
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
and
we
we
are
only have
halfway through the
45 minutes.
podcast.
So yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I think
Let's go.
I think we'll see what they do. I mean, maybe we see some shakeups in terms of the way they release stuff, but I think that to you guys' point, I think there's pros and cons to each side of either releasing everything at once or shifting it and continuing to do what they've been doing. So
Yeah, yeah.
um, so cool. Well, yeah, we are now halfway through, and we haven't even talked about the Mistweaver stuff. So let's sort of get into it. So I put together sort of a little bit of an outline of how we'll talk about it. But I guess Drez, I wanted to first sort of open it up with like, what are your sort of just high level thoughts? Like, did Blizzard hit the mark with the tree? Are they missing it? Is this a bad tree? Are we the shadow priests of the world here? Or are we like the resto shamans and like hunters of the world in terms of the way you think the tree planned out?
So from the other trees I've seen, like the one thing I think they did super well on ours is giving us diversity on if people do want to play differently, they do have options to do so. Granted, there's probably going to be one best way to do it, but there is
Mhm.
a way we can play Soothing Mist and like stand in range if you want to. Again, the problem is you can't use half your kit, so why are you doing that anyways?
Right.
Some people choose to do it.
There's
I
there is some merit to that on a fight like a Sledge Fist, right? If you could be considered not melee.
yeah, but
Sledge Fist
then
and Nathrius are both like you want to balance your ranged and melee groups with
yeah,
like even numbers. And so if you could as a Mistweaver swap between those two, there's a reason to do it, even if Caster is just a worse melee Mistweaver.
yes, but there'd have to be some way to change how the game recognizes you, and we're
Yeah,
recognized now first as melee and then
right.
healer instead of how it used to be. Like sometimes we were melee, sometimes we were a healer,
Yeah,
depending on the mechanic. Like back in Legion BFA stuff like that.
right.
But I'd say that the best thing is like there is a clear way you can go Mythic Plus for stuff you want to do. Now that we have talents to test it, they've already started changing things. Like Ancient Teachings of the Monastery now has a different activator, so we're not dumping all our mana into Essence Font. It's now more of a filler in between not getting resets on your Phalanx Stomp. It's
Mhm.
going to be there so we can still use that ability, but we don't have to just slam it and then clip it, not even use it for its actual functionality, but just what it's like
Just triggering
doing
an item.
just for its trigger, which like I don't care about, but whatever. I wish there was a way to skip it, but I understand why no matter how you break out your points, you have to take it. It's just it interacts with so many other things that it's kind of needed to be there just in case.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but we do have a couple things that are just way too strong and going to be way too bonkers, and they need to be tuned down in some way. There's just so many things that have synergy with each other, which yes feel awesome, but we could approach Nyalotha tiers of just ridiculousness, where at least back then it was all because of a board power system. This is all going to be tuned corely to us. So I'm more fearful of, because of how strong it looks at the moment without things being fully tested and implemented, that they might prune back a bit too much and then confuse our identity as a result of what we want to do. And we might just end up in the same spot as we are now, where there's a fraction of the community that's like, Rising Mist is the best. We love playing it. I love doing damage and healing via that, but we're not interacting with their frames. And then other players that only want to interact with their frames and don't want to hit any damaging buttons. Like
Hmm.
if one, that's like the conundrum we're in. If one part of that dynamic is too strong, they might just tune it down, and then we're stuck in the middle of like, we kind of do a bunch of things pretty decently, but we're not, there's no reason to bring us. Like our reason looking into Dragonflight, to answer your question, is we're going to bring so much throughput that like any sort of rot fight we are going to be the kings of, it looks like. And doing sustained HPS we're going to be the kings of. We're going to bring
Hmm.
some damage that is important, and we bring a raid buff in a
Two of
sense.
them,
It's not
actually.
too important, but there's other classes that are probably going to be brought. Like brewmasters are always pretty solid.
Right.
Windwalker's looking pretty good in multiple damage types now that they
Yeah.
need to do, or damage profiles that they need to do. So that is way less important. So I'm glad we're getting a lot of tools to do this spreading rems and hots and vivify cleave healing, and kind of going to super turret manatee vivify spam mode. But it might just be way too strong and unhealthy for the game.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I had a very similar, when the tree first dropped, a very similar reaction of like, this looks very cool, very good. I think they hit the mark. Um, Only a couple of gripes, I'll say. And maybe this is where we sort of talk about sort of like the bad sections of the tree. I think the tree in
Whoa.
general is really.
How about
Sorry.
before we get into the bad sections of the tree, do you want to walk through the tree? Because we have not gone
Oh
through
yeah,
the
sure,
spec
sure.
tree at all.
Yeah,
I've
we should
stared so
probably
much
start
at the
there.
tree that I'm like, oh, everyone else knows
Right.
what
Yeah.
the
I have
talents
no
are.
idea what's
They know
in
what
the
I'm talking
Mistweaver tree. I have spent no time. I've never even pulled it up before today. So
about.
we're gonna
Yeah,
go
yeah,
through
pull it up,
it.
pull it up.
Hey,
So
I looked at
Yeah.
the
I've got
brewmaster
some
tree
stuff
like
picked on
the
the
third
class tree
day.
side, and y'all can yell at me if I picked anything really stupid. But
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll focus on maybe the
but
spec side and then the class tree side.
yeah,
There's really, I mean, there's not too much there. So I mean, like on the spec side, I guess like the first 8 points, you basically take a bunch of what you want, right? Or you basically take everything, right? So like you'll end up with like our starting points always enveloping mist, and then you will take both essence font and renewing mist on the next side, just because you need to use as many points as you can. And then you'll take
mhm,
all the tier 3 ones. So you'll take Life Cocoon, 'cause just a solid cooldown. You'll take Thunder Focus Tea because there's a ton of synergy around that spell right now. And then the far right one is Invigorating Mists, and that's just the cleave healing from
right,
Vivify into the Renewing Mist. So nothing too crazy just yet. And then down from there, you'll get the new Revival Restoral choice now, which is actually really interesting, which is cool. So to be fair, this is probably partly Blizzard's like, I don't want to keep remembering to whitelist or
Yeah.
sort of like allow or disallow revival to spells, but it basically changes. It's no change to the healing of revival. What it does is one side will dispel magic effects, which is revival, and the other side, restoral, is disease and poisons, along with being able to be casted while stunned. So you sort of pick the one that you want. I'd say in general, like you'll probably default restoral actually in
yeah,
most cases, both PvP and PvE,
yep,
and you'll pull out revival when you have a specific magic debuff, just because typically the raid debuffs are gonna be magic. So
yeah. Speaking of,
um,
we have
mhm.
wiped to Chaotic Spark a number of times because of somebody pushing revival and instant dispelling them all.
Yes, yes, the sparks, yeah. And then the final point in this sort of 8 point piece is always going to be Mastery of Mist, just because it gives Renewing Mist a second charge and
Right.
basically brings it in line today. Um,
Hopefully they sort of condense those talents, because it feels weird that they're spreading it out over three, like just to get our current functionality back. I understand why, but it's a little
Yeah.
awkward on
Yeah.
different
So
parts.
yeah, and what Drez is saying, that whole right side of like renewing mist into invigorating into mastery of mist is all it just turns vivify and rem into what it is today, basically.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so it's not a bad start. I mean, we also have we have teachings of the monastery, which is on the far left side, which we didn't talk about. It's just the typical buff today. Generally, we'll also be taking that in any tree.
So you're taking
And
like
then there's healing elixir, which
everything
uh,
except for healing elixir. You're probably taking.
Yeah.
probably healing elixir in Mythic Plus. Just well, no, actually, no. I don't even think you take it in Mythic Plus.
It's really only PvP where at least
Yeah.
this PvP discussions for Mistweaver is where I've seen it taken. And plus you basically don't need it. Like you already have access to so many things in the class tree that make you unkillable that you don't need to spend a point here. And there's just so many better things towards the bottom that
Right.
you'd want to put a point into.
Right.
Right.
There's
Eh,
this is one of the nodes that I could see being like a casual slash leveling like a solo player kind of talent where
Hmm.
you just take it so you can munch an instant heal on yourself while
Yeah.
you're out
If they
doing
do
world
move
content.
things around and move where it's positioned, because everything else that it's connected to, you can get to in a different way that feels a lot better.
Right.
So maybe you end up taking it along the way to get to something that you don't otherwise have access to. But
Hmm.
then again, that also feels bad from a choice perspective where, oh, I have to take this thing just to get to the thing I really want.
Right. But it's also like right now, if you're out doing solo content, you don't really need Mastery of Mists, for example. You're never gonna use both charges of Renewing Mist because you're alone. Um,
Yeah.
Right.
so then you can access everything that you could with Mastery of Mist by taking Healing Elixir instead, if that's a thing you care about. A lot of us that are raiding or doing keys or whatever are gonna have so much gear that we can just kind of do whatever the fuck we want out in the world.
Yeah.
So we
The
don't have
other
to
thing
think
is it
about it.
doesn't auto trigger like it does in current,
Thank God.
which
Yeah.
sometimes is nice, sometimes isn't. Like for a brewmaster, you want to control when it's happening.
Yeah.
On a monk, most of the time you're just going about doing your things. Like if you
Yeah.
took it as Mistweaver, and if it auto triggered, it's the same as your curing vial going off. You're just like, oh, cool. I don't have to worry about healing myself
Yeah.
because it
Right.
went off. So
Right. Yeah. So I mean, the that healing elixir is in a weird spot. But yeah, it's not. I mean, I guess yeah, that's probably why they placed it there is that you can skip it if you want, but if you want to take it as sort of more of a like a outdoor content type talent, it's there for you.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some better options for rating Mythic Plus PvP or I guess somewhat PvP. I'll take it potentially, but
yeah,
um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so as you move to like the next section, this is so the far left side is Spirit of the Spirit of the Crane now, which is just what it is today. It gives you mana back from your teaching the monastery stacks. So it's a nice mana restoration talent. You've got Mists of Life, which is actually fairly strong in its current iteration, but it basically anytime you
right.
put Life Cocoon on someone, you will also cast Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist on the same target.
So
Sorry, I'm going across the right here.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
so that means that you can using Life Cocoon actually have three rems out. Like you can go rem Life Cocoon and have three rems out at the same time.
correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we should
And
have more based on other talents, which we'll
and
get
you can
to.
extend it and all, and there's some other
Yeah.
funky interactions that have
Yep.
been found out, but
Yeah, procs
Yep.
mastery. So it's actually considered so in the grand scheme of things, currently the way it works, it's actually considered a cast of enveloping mist and a cast of renewing mist on your life cocoon target. So it'll
Okay.
proc mastery.
Yeah.
And if you do it on a person with a essence font hot on it, it'll proc mastery twice, which
Yep.
means a total of 4 procs. Because you get one from the enveloping mist, one from the renewing mist, and then double it. So
Right.
it's
and I
a it's a
believe
Okay.
if you TFT into it, it procs your TFT, or did that
it,
get changed?
no the well as of last build, SI would work with
Oh,
it,
it
and
was
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
Sorry. What's
SI and
SI?
TFT.
What?
So Spirit Infusion. I'll
Okay.
use real words. That's a
Secret
later talent
infusion.
or Secret Infusion. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all the
Um,
way towards the bottom. So we'll get to
Okay.
it, and then you'll be like, "Oh, that's really cool."
Yeah.
You're gonna
yeah,
like it, I'm sure.
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, so and then you have, I guess, to the right of that, you have uplifting spirits, which is really good. It's just it adds a hot to revival along with every time you crit a rising sun kick or vivify, reduces the cooldown of revival. Um, Again, with the way that rem spreading should work with some of these other talents, this will be very strong in terms of reducing rem's cooldown. Where today it's not, it's good, not great. Or uplifting spirits
You
is
don't
a
take it because of the cooldown reduction currently.
yeah,
You take it because of
yeah,
the extra healing.
Gotcha.
exactly.
But if you have more
Um,
rims out, you get more Vivify crits because you're vivifying more targets?
yeah,
Question mark.
Yeah, it looks
Okay.
like we're gonna be way more caster focused, at least like casting Vivify focus,
Right.
which some players don't like. But with everything else that's in the tree, like if you're not casting Vivify, you're playing it wrong.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. And then so we get access to Zen Pulse just to the right here, which is a good Mythic Plus. So this was an old talent from Legion, I believe.
Is this also a
Yeah,
PvP talent right now or not?
no,
I
No.
don't think
Okay.
so. I don't think it's in the game currently.
Gotcha.
yeah,
But yeah, so it basically places a hot on a player with mobs around them, and then will proc healing and damage when that player takes damage, basically.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, so it's really strong in Mythic Plus. Fairly strong in PvP. I'm assuming too. I don't PvP, so we're guessing here. In raids, less useful just because there's not a ton of mobs. You want basically a lot of mobs around the person who you're casting this on.
Gotcha.
Um, so yeah, and then we get our mana talent. So it's a life cycles mana T choice node, which is what it is today anyway. I will say that to be honest with you, like if the original version of this tree before we started really diving in, I would say it's always one you always take this, but I think potentially in today's world you actually skip this.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
you skip some version of a mana talent, be it this or
yeah,
be it spirit, or
yeah,
in some scenarios both.
Okay.
I've made builds where I skip both because I just like envision not having mana problems.
Yeah.
hmm
Um, yeah, so you might get some options down in the tree because of skipping those.
yeah, yeah. So back over to the left, we'll sort of just take this left to right. The nourishing tree node. This is again, it just it's whatever.
It's more
It's
PvP.
Yeah, but
To be quite
basically, yeah,
honest.
you increases your hots on life cocoon targets and lasts an additional 10 seconds after life cocoon is gone. So it is good, but in PvE, in general PvE, not the best talent.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think it overflowing mist extremely strong. The right of that, this is basically with enveloping mist. It'll put
Aha.
an additional buff on someone every time they take damage, heals them for 4% of their or 3% of their maximum HP. So on anyone, it is this. So this procs on any damage has a 0.5-second ICD, and the heal itself can crit, and the heal is boosted by enveloping mist. So it's actually
It's also
more than 4%.
It's
Wait, did
also
Sorry,
they
3%.
important to note that, like, this is an old Azerite trait, and the
Yeah,
Azerite trait before was just flat healing, where this is percent of the target's healing, which
right.
is way, way better. So it doesn't
Gotcha.
matter that it still has an ICD and all that sort of stuff, because it
yeah,
just functions so much better.
Gotcha.
yeah.
Because that was the thing. I remember at the beginning of BFA, we found this trait. We found it worked with stagger.
Yeah.
And so you were getting
Yeah.
this nice flat heal with every stagger tick, along with every damage event. And it was just incredibly good for healing a Brewmaster.
Yeah.
That's where the ICD came from, is Brewmasters. You can
Yeah.
thank us for that one.
Awesome. Yeah.
Um, so this is one where, because of the change from it being a flat heal to a percent heal, now it no longer matters that there's that ICD there.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Well,
no, it
well,
does
the ICD
because
also got lowered from 1 second to a half second, which
Okay.
is very important. You get
Yeah.
more effective healing from it,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
You get twice as many on the Brewmaster. You get twice as many heals. Literally just
Yeah.
double it.
yeah. We haven't. I don't think I've tested if it works with stagger. I know it works with basically spell or like
Autos.
mob spell damage or
Right.
just auto attacks.
The Azurite
Um,
trait did, so they would have had to have changed it to make it not work with stagger. But we could hop on alpha later and
yeah, that's fair. So the next node you get is your invokes. So you either invoke Yulan or invoke Chi to the right of this. Standard celestials. This will be taken in pretty much every build that I can think of.
There's
Um,
no way you
the
don't take it.
Yeah, the one nice part about this now is that Invoke Yulan comes with a flat 33% reduction in your enveloping mist cost. So
okay.
you get basically a third mana cost off your enveloping mist, which is a nice quality of life change. No longer need to pair Yulan with like
Manatee.
some sort of like innervate or even manatee, right?
Yeah.
That's why we can skip the mana talents essentially.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
And Chi-Ji, you don't really have mana problems when you play Chi-Ji. So
Gotcha.
yeah, yeah. To the right of this are some buffs to Zen Pulse. So Zen Reverberation and Accumulating Mist. I'll be completely honest. I don't know what either of these things do. But
They buff Zen Pulse is what they do.
they z- yeah they make some additionally on Zen Pulse though.
They also both just got buffed in a blue post. So there's one where like while you channel Soothing Mist, it like makes it better for as long as you're choosing channeling Soothing Mist. I think that got buffed by to like 30% or something, and the other one got buffed to like 50%.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
like these things have to be tested, but like you're not taking it because of the healing. You might just heal the target more to buff the damage. Is
Yeah.
essentially what ends up happening.
So this is
Right.
you
Yeah.
put this on the tank. The tank is in all of the mobs, and
Yeah.
then you just Zen Pulse them so that you get some AoE damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And granted, Zen Pulse, like I think it's a bit overrated. Like, it's not gonna contribute a whole heck of a lot of damage.
Okay.
Like, you might just be better off spinning crane kicking, so you might just take Pulse itself and not take the bonus effects to it,
Right.
because it doesn't add too much, and you have a point that you can spend somewhere better, but
Yeah.
that will have to be seen in a bunch of testing coming up.
Right.
Yeah.
Then we've got I know this one, the Sleepy Cloud, Song of Chi
I
Chi.
love it.
Hate this talent. Gross.
I
I
have
literally will never respect this.
I have seen one I have seen this once, and it is when I spec'd it back in the order hall in Legion just to see what it looked like, right?
Yeah.
Or was it in Legion? It was a Legion talent. Oh, I spec'd it at
Yeah,
Yes.
some
it
point.
was in Legion. I used it in Taurus Council when we were missing a druid for roots, so we DK gripped them all together and I slept them.
Oh.
So that's the one time I've used it
Oh
in
yeah,
any
you're right.
form of content, and it was really cool to use. I just like I was like, "Oh, I'm all ready to do this thing." Like, it made me
Yeah.
hyped for the fight, but that's, like, the only application I've seen it be used practical,
Like
except PvP, like CC chains.
the biggest reason that this doesn't get taken in PvE is that it competes with Ring of Peace, right?
Yeah,
Like
Yeah.
absolutely.
you pick Ring of Peace or you pick this, and Ring of Peace is just way more unique, way more valuable in
It's a
most
tank
scenarios.
external. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
so
Can't take damage if you
It's
don't get hit.
yeah.
yeah, it's good in pretty much everything. Yeah. And the final one on the right here is another, it's brand new, really strong rapid diffusion. So it's essentially every time you rising sun kick or enveloping mist, you apply renewing mist for 6 seconds to an ally in 40 yards.
Wait, what the hell?
So
Yeah.
yeah, so insanely strong. And the renewing mist lasts either 3 or 6 seconds, depending on points. So it lasts for 6 seconds. From what at least I've seen tested, because this was just implemented this week, like
Right.
essentially you can extend this renewing mist. So you can extend it using Rising Mist for up to 12 seconds instead of just the base 6.
Okay.
And then it was also, was it was this the one that was procking Mastery when it triggered? I forget. I think there was a different talent. But in any event,
I think it's
right
a
now
different
just
one.
having more renewing mists out is great. And
W
since we'll be casting enveloping probably more often than we think going into Dragonflight, there'll be a lot of renewing mists out on the raid, for
what I
sure.
do like about this, like, where it's placed and all that, is it gives the player like, as you're leveling, it gives you an idea of how you wanna start playing your monk. By it
Hmm.
being triggered by Rising Sun Kick, you're like, "Oh, I didn't have that talented previously in the class
Oh,
tree.
that's
I'm gonna go
true.
pick that up.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start using this." And then if you search further down the line, you get to Rising Mist, which triggers an extension on our HOTS when we Rising Sun Kick. So it starts to piece together things where currently, as you're leveling, there's no sort of fluidity to it. Like, until you hit max level and
Right.
start getting legendaries and other things, that's when you're like, "Oh, there's this whole build of way to play Mistweaver." And I think that's part of why the community is fractured on, like, do I play in range or in melee,
Right.
despite a lot of things gearing us towards melee. So I like how this talent helps to reinforce that idea
Early
earlier
on.
on in
Yeah.
the choice cycle.
Like
Yeah.
if I reset the talents that we've spent here, I just go straight for that. You have to spend the 8 points just reaching that point. You have to spend a bunch over
Mhm.
here, but you could be level 29 and have 2 points in this talent.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be, I mean, right now, just based on what we've seen, this is one of the first ones as we were reviewing the tree that were like, this is like renewing mist, spreading a bunch of hots is seems to be a gameplay direction that Blizzard's taken the
Yeah.
class. So um so yeah. So so yeah, so I mean it's a very cool new talent. We'll see what changes, if any, come from it, but right now it's pretty strong. Strong. All right, so we'll move quickly through some of the next ones. I'll probably just highlight the ones I think that are more important than talking about each and every one of these.
Right.
Sort of on the next row. But Elon's Whisper is back. So this is just a legendary. Every time you trigger Thunder Focus T, you get a little free heal in front of you, sort of in your
Okay.
area.
Yep. This was the
Um,
artifact. Wait, right? Or did you say that? This is the artifact
the
effect.
the
Yeah, artifact
legendary,
trait and
right?
legendary.
Legendary, yeah. Sorry, you're
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm. You get a choice node to the right of that, which is either Mist Wrap or sorry, it's Mist Wrap or Refreshing Jadewind. Interesting choice between the two, I'll say. I think Refreshing Jadewind, like the prioritization of that is much lower based on sort of the other spells and other talents you have around
Right.
this, right? And pretty much any content, I'll say. And to be fair, this is sort of a node that I can foresee people skipping
Yeah.
because, and this is actually the one gripe I have with this tree, is that the center of this tree is so well connected that you almost end up dumping a ton of points here that limit your choices to the ends, which I think we'll talk about, like the corners,
Gotcha.
basically. But you have Miswrap, Refreshing Jadewind. Miswrap still affects Enveloping Mist the same way it does. So it's still fairly strong. To the right of that, you have Enveloping Breath, same exact ability that's applied to our Celestials now. It's now you need to put a point into it. Just means every time you have a Celestial out and you cast Enveloping Mist, Enveloping Breath will spread to up to 5 targets in the vicinity. So again,
Okay.
just more healing. Dancing Mist is back, which basically means every time Renewing Mist is cast or jumps, has a 10% chance to replicate that. Extremely strong.
Yeah.
I think it
Especially
from
with
what
all the
it'll also pair
extra.
with Rapid Diffusion. Yep, as
Yeah.
those jump. And so it'll be nice. It'll be a very hopefully nice talent where we'll have a bunch of rems everywhere, all over the raid. So definitely Dancing Mist sort of focusing in on that sort of spread hot based gameplay is good. And then the final one here is just Font of Life. Again, this was a Azurite trait. It just means it's basically every time it increases Essence Font healing from the bolts themselves, the initial heal, and then also reduces or has a chance to reduce Thunder Focus T's cooldown by 1 second. Um, and this will potentially be a take. It'll probably be why you cast Essence Font, I'll say,
Just to get the
in the
thunder
way that it
focus
works.
T
Just
reduction.
the reduction, yeah.
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 The one thing I wanted to add, like I'm a lot higher on Common Coalescence than a lot of players are, especially if we find ourselves soothing as much as we might be. So
Yeah.
if you have an extra point because you're dropping a mana talent, you might end up putting it there, because it can end up being a very substantial absorb. Granted, it's not the greatest external like that we have baseline, but it could end up being nice in some situations.
Ah,
Like paired with other stuff, it might let you as the monk solo soak stuff instead of having to pop everything you have in your toolkit. You
right.
might just need to pop diffuse and a buffed up version of this. You can then solo soak a mechanic or something.
I also think people are generally too low on Life Cocoon as an external. Like,
For a tank external, it's not the best, but for any other player in a party external, it's very good.
right. And even for tanks, um, it's the only external that gives you effectively an immediate large amount of health. I guess there's also
Yeah.
Guardian
Mhm.
Spirit that does the same thing. Um, this just like dumps a bunch of health on you, and Common Coalescence furthers that. Like it's not a lay on hands, but it's that same kind of thing, and it's on a much lower cooldown. And if you
Yeah.
fully stack this up, it is probably actually a lay on hands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you over time, if you are dedicating globals to a single target heal other players, it will stack up. Like it doesn't drop off. Like it doesn't have to be done over like a 30-second period.
Right.
It will just eventually stack up over time. And if you want to play around it, you can. Obviously, it's not going to feel great to just stand, be like, wait, guys, I need to channel on myself for like
Yeah.
15 seconds or whatever it is to get a substantial heal. But
Right.
it's something you can do. I like the idea of it. I like that it's not connected to a whole bunch of things that are important to make other builds, but I like it as an additional choice if you want to move stuff around. If you're like, oh, I don't actually need Font of Life
Right.
for
Mhm.
whatever reason.
This is also something
Yeah.
that like maybe you don't take it if you're in a group with like two priests and a paladin and they really have all the externals covered. But if your comp is
Yeah,
more like a couple of shamans and you and a holy priest, then maybe this becomes more valuable because then you're kind of short on player externals, and this just makes your major external cooldown better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the only gripe I have with it, which is it's just out of the way, right?
Yeah.
It's down at like you're gonna end up taking Spirit of the Crane or Nourishing Chi to get to it, and
Mhm.
it's a 2 point investment. Like it's 2 points you can't
Yeah.
put elsewhere. So
You
it's
you
a
would never take Nourishing Chi to get like, maybe
yeah. I
PvP you
mean,
do it, but PvE, it's always gonna be a choice off of with, Spirit of the Crane,
Right.
which
yeah.
feels awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the like when I spoke about like the center of the tree being so strong and like you want to spend a bunch of points in the center of our tree,
Right.
it's getting to these things to the left and even to the right, like we'll talk
Right.
about in a second,
Yeah.
that are like it just feels a little like it feels difficult to get over there, we'll say.
Right.
Yeah.
As you sort of spec out.
But
But
that's enough on that talent.
yeah,
It
yeah,
probably got
exactly.
more spotlight than it needed to, but
Yeah.
I like it. A lot of people don't, I
Yeah.
think.
So yeah, so then moving on to like our final, getting close to the capstones, we have our two covenant abilities coming back. So on the left hand side, you have Feline Stomp, which people are excited about, and then on the right hand side, you have Bone Dust Brew, which people are less excited about, maybe. Um,
Why not both?
so
Significantly.
yeah. So they're both back. I'd say, the maybe we'll take the Feline Stomp line as a whole in this conversation, but basically Feline Stomp and then the 3 talent points after that essentially all buff the damage and add a little bit of healing into Feline Stomp. So it's really, to me, like this is sort of the area of the tree where if you're going into almost you want to only do damage to cover your maintenance healing, which is I think maybe the way I'm going to describe this going to Dragonflight, less about a caster version of Mistweaver versus a melee version of Mistweaver. It's more of like, what is your maintenance healing you're doing? Are you casting a
Right.
spell? Are you doing damage? In this case, like Ancient Concordance and then Awakened Phalanx at the bottom basically allow you to sort of utilize like ancient teachings in the monastery and the actual, I guess, the healing of Phalanx Stomp
Right.
itself to sort of do that maintenance healing for you
So I'm gonna
while
assume
buffing your damage.
everybody listening knows what Feline Stomp is. We're gonna go over these two talents below it though, because these are new. Um,
Yeah,
the first one, Ancient Concordance. Your blackout kicks strike 6 additional targets and have an
I
additional 6% chance to reset the cooldown of Rising Sun Kick while within your Feline Stomp. 6
right.
additional targets is a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the idea though is that it's based on um it's based on the blackout kick cleave mechanic, right?
Right.
it's
So
also, I believe, incorrect, like the tooltip, the way
Okay.
it
right,
actually functions. Yeah. Like it's not actually 6
Okay.
with like this weird multiplicative stuff with your teachings on the monastery.
yeah.
Gotcha.
It's supposed to be 3 targets with 2 points. So the
Gotcha.
tooltip's bugged on it.
Tooltip's bugged.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3
Yeah,
additional targets. Still very good, but
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
not
still
Not
pretty good.
6.
as insane.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then the next one, Awakened Phalanx. This incorporates pieces of the existing legendary, right? The Unity legendary for Night Fae. Your abilities reset
mhm,
Phalanx Stomp 100% more often. While in
Yeah.
Phalanx Stomp, your Tiger Palm strikes 2 targets, and your Spinning Crane Kick heals 5 nearby allies for 15% of the damage done.
So though that last portion of it is new,
Yeah.
and it probably, I think it sounds a lot better than it is. Like
yeah,
the
Yeah.
math on the spinning crane kick portion, it just like isn't enough for you to wanting to be doing that as your healing. Maybe if ancient teachings of the monastery had spinning crane kick as something, it would be nice, but it
Right.
just currently doesn't. So like that, you might not actually spec all the way down. You might just take the point before it and skip
Right.
that one.
Okay.
mhm.
We're gonna
Yeah,
do that
based
for
on some
right now.
testing.
We're gonna do that for right
Yeah,
now.
but it's so yeah, to me, I mean, this is sort of fully going into this idea of like you want to do damage to basically handle any lighter damage in any sort of content you're doing, right? Like I don't think these spells or the way that Phalanx Stomp is built and these talents, sorry, aren't going to replace casting other spells in the monk toolkit.
Right.
So the idea here is that this is sort of your, that's why I'm saying maintenance. Like this is sort of the group took a little bit of unavoidable damage, wasn't a
Right.
big hit. You're not going to stop and cast a renewing mist or vivify. You're just going to Phalanx Stomp, hit some damage buttons
Right.
and top off that group, right?
Right. So this is like
Um,
if you look at the other side, if you look at the broker boss, right? This is your I'm just gonna slowly heal up the group after we take the falling damage kind of stuff, not
Yeah.
the how I deal with healing the people that have the spark on them or the damage from after the bomb
Exactly.
going.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, so that's sort of the Feline Stomp side, and then if we shift to the opposite side, we'll take the Bone Dust Brew side real quick, which is Bone Dust Brew into Resplendent Mist, which is the conduit that we have today. Just you have a 50 or 100% chance to increase the healing, or sorry, you have a 30% chance to have Gust of Mist do 50 or 100% more healing.
Yeah.
It's trash.
But you
It's, I
have to
mean,
take it to get the Bone Dust Brew Legendary or Conduit.
exactly,
That
exactly.
talent feels so awkwardly placed. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't belong there, but
yeah,
they needed to tie it to something.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind
Wild
of
idea. What if they
whatever.
removed it?
It wouldn't matter. Like
Yeah,
if it's
Yeah.
gone, like we're already probably not taking it.
yeah,
Mhm.
But it being gone doesn't mean we're going to like Bone Dust Brew suddenly becomes good because we can get to the other choices a point earlier. Like the
right.
Bone Dust side is just too awkward.
Got you. Okay. So the other things we've got Bountiful Brew, which is the Covenant Legendary for Necrolords
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah.
Literally copy paste.
Bad. Bad.
Um, and then we've got Attenuation, which is the Conduit, which is primarily like the value is its cooldown reduction effect. It
Mm,
it has the well, I don't know, maybe that's not the case for you guys. That's the case for Brewmasters. Is you care about
it's
the
not
cooldown
it's
Well,
not the
reduction?
case for us really. It's
Okay.
more of like the lead by example stuff is why you would take it.
Right.
So if
Okay.
it had some sort of main stat bonus component into it instead of that, that'd be nice. Like it I think effectively becomes a 50-second cooldown for us,
Right.
sometimes a little bit lower.
w- well, they
Well,
cap. So
it's
the
capped at
cooldown
five
reduction
seconds.
is capped at 2.5
Yeah.
seconds. So, and I don't know if it's still capped on alpha because it
It
wasn't
probably
implemented.
it probably is,
Um,
but
when I tested last build, but yeah, I mean the reason, I mean, you take attenuation in this sort of group in this sort of choice node anyway, just because Bountiful Brew being extremely random is an issue, right? It could proc on
right,
someone that is standing by themselves. It could proc on the boss, but the boss's hitbox is massive, and when you proc it on
right.
an enemy, it procs to the center of their hitbox, so
Like
it
the
could
Eye
miss
of the Jailer
everybody.
problem, where it procs
Yeah,
on the Eye of the Jailer, and your Bone Dust Brew goes flying off in the distance and hits nobody.
exactly. Yeah.
The other problem with it is the healing is at 20%. The healing and damage is at 20%. Where on live it's scaled up to I think somewhere like
Right. This is
75.
like if you had an eye
Yeah.
level 180 conduit, not
Yeah,
Exactly.
a
so
not a
that might
278.
have to be addressed for it to be an option for us to take. Like that
I think
whole just section is just kind of underwhelming and
yeah,
underpowered. It already isn't awesome with what we have in Shadowlands,
right.
but
Mhm.
the versions that they've brought over just
I
aren't
think that's
cutting
a
it.
common issue with a lot of the conduits that they brought forward. They just brought forward the eye level 184 one or whatever, and need to bump it up to 278 at least.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I guess so that's sort of the bonus brew side, like we're sort of saying, not more than likely not going to be taken, at least currently, right? They'll have to maybe move some stuff around, buff some of
Right.
it, things like that. But then you have the center of the tree, which is actually fairly strong. So you have, a choice node, starting with the choice node between Ancient Teachings in the Monastery and Clouded Focus. Very good choice node. I think this is honestly one of the best choice nodes on the tree, I'll say, where
Okay.
you could take one or the other.
Yeah.
There are definitely areas where you'd want to take ancient teachings, particularly if you're going down Phaline Stomp, and that sort of track. And then Clouded Focus is very strong. And the if you read it, basically what it says, if you don't know, it's a legendary today. But the idea is, as you're channeling Soothing Mist, if you cast Enveloping or Vivify, it will put a buff on you that will reduce the mana cost by 20% and increase the healing by 20% of Vivify and Enveloping Mist. And it stacks up to 3 times. And the best part about this is that this buff to Vivify's healing is transferred to your Cleave healing. The idea is we
Okay.
already have a couple talents that put more Renewing Mist on the raid than you can channel Soothing Mist, cast a bunch of Vivifies, and you now have, a massive amount of blanket
So
healing
this
for
is
the raid.
really not you're not taking this to funnel healing into a single target. You're
No.
taking this after you ramp your rems, you soothing mist literally anybody, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
And
you're
then
going to probably
you
channel a tank,
right,
but like you're pointing out, you're eventually gonna overheal them anyway, so you just
right,
keep on them and keep slamming that button.
right.
Yeah.
So this is something like I could think of a number of places where, like, currently we have our druid ramping their hots, and then they use whatever button they push that just heals everybody.
Flourish
Yeah, they push flourish. And this is
or
that.
convoke or anything.
This is build
Yeah.
your own flourish.
You
Just
sit,
a
yeah,
lot more
somewhat.
often.
Yeah, with just on demand whenever we
Yeah.
want. To be fair. So
That
I
seems
mean,
really good.
The
yeah.
other important thing to note just about the choice is that Ancient Teachings has been nerf buffed by the healing
Okay.
being brought down a bit, but it having an additional activator of Feline
Yeah.
Stomp.
Okay.
So it went from 250% of your damage is healing to 200.
Right.
So the talent itself is just a bit less effective at doing the maintenance healing, but that should be offset by the Feline talents that they're implementing. At least that seems like what their goal is
Right.
to make it.
Mhm.
That the power
Okay.
level is a bit lower on that by itself, but it combos with other stuff that makes it about the same.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and then just I guess a couple more of these ones. You have another choice now next to that, which is Jade Bond, which is
It's
just
not a choice.
yeah, you take Gift of Celestial, it basically reduces your invokes by 2 minutes, but then also shortens their duration to 12 seconds. So it's essentially a third reduction in cooldown for half duration, which is really good.
Wait. So your
Yeah,
Celestial's gonna be a 1 minute cooldown?
Yeah.
yeah, and their last halftime.
Wait. So we have cooldown
Yeah,
reduction on Celestials, don't we? Or is that on Revival?
revival.
Oh, okay.
Revival.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be I mean it's just a default take. Like and that's what I'm saying is like this center line of talents is so default that like getting to the sides is just feels bad
Yeah.
because they're
They
things you're going
have
to take in any build.
They have buffed the other choice on this by raising the additional healing on Jade Bond from 12% to 25%. So that it probably still isn't enough, but if you need a really powerful CD in like a specific section of a boss, that might be the reason you take it, and it also lasts double the time. The
Okay.
problem currently with how our Celestials work is there's no real damage pattern that lasts 25 seconds that you want to be using it the entire time. You're
Right.
usually using it for 8 to 12 seconds. So that's
Right.
Yeah.
why on top of the reduced cooldown from Gift of the Celestial, like it's almost like the perfect talent, which
Yeah.
Okay.
which sucks in
Yeah.
some regards.
Yeah. Yeah, and just I guess a couple more highlights is we have Secret Infusion, like we mentioned earlier, right below that, which basically just every time you use Thunder Focus Tea, depending on the spell you buff with it, you get a additional buff to a stat line. So if you
Right.
like buff Enveloping Mist, you get crit, 10% crit. If you buff, Renewing Mist, it's 10% haste. So it's just a very good you're going to be casting Thunder Focus Tea every 30 seconds anyway, at least sometimes sooner. It's 10% of a stat of your choosing. So
Right. Okay.
it's really good. And then to the right of that, Misty Peaks, which I believe is also a brand new talent. Every time Renewing Mist heals, you have a 10% chance to proc Enveloping Mist for 3 seconds, which
That's
is
neat.
just additional healing. It's affected by Miswrap, so it'll be 30 or 40% additional healing depending,
Wow.
and it's just
Okay.
generally really strong.
And this is something that's also going to scale with the number of renewing mists that you have out.
Exactly.
So if you
Yeah.
have a
Exactly.
bunch up from Rapid Diffusion, from whatever this one's called, Dancing Mists, then suddenly you have Enveloping Mists on a ton of the raid. So, like, my question, we'll get to this, I guess, at the end, but is this like Nyalotha Corruption kind of stuff? Like, where
We're
you're gonna
getting
have
towards it.
Enveloping Mists, and Renewing Mists on the whole
Uh,
raid?
Not the
uh,
whole raid, no,
Okay.
but a large portion of the raid to the point where because of the way our hot works and it jumps once it's healed somebody and goes to somebody else, the quicker we can top person A is the quicker we get to the next person and then the next person and the next person. And
Right.
as enveloping mist is procking on people, it further helps heal them quicker. So then our
Right.
hots keep jumping, have more of a chance to spread, and then everybody's covered in hots eventually. Or
yeah.
at least have had a hot throughout this period of time.
This looks
Yeah.
crazy. This looks really good.
Yeah. And then I guess at the bottom, we end up with two very fun talents. You have Rising Mist. You have a choice now between Rising Mist and Teaching. Oh, sorry. And Tear of Morning, which I'd say really, again, is not a choice. I don't think Tear is strong enough in
Yeah.
terms of like what it provides. So you're generally going to take Rising Mist in most cases if you're down here.
I
And
understand why they paired it together, but like you're saying, Rising Mist is just 90% of the time you take it for what
right,
they're trying to accomplish a similar thing.
Right.
exactly. And then to the left of that you have
Yeah,
Invoker's
Invokers.
Delight, which is it did get a nerf, so a slight nerf. So it basically is the Invokers it is today, so it's 33% haste for 20 seconds. However, if you do take the Celestial reduction, it reduces that 20 seconds to what is 8 seconds, I think is what they
8.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it used to be amazing because you'd have
Ooh.
33% haste
For
for basically 20 seconds every minute.
yeah,
But it was
that's
one of those
really
things. As
good.
soon as you see that as soon as you test it on alpha and realize it doesn't reduce the duration, you're like, they have to do something because
Yeah.
it's way too strong.
Yeah.
But
Getting
Of
a
course.
class Bloodlust every minute was
Yeah.
is a little too
there
crazy.
was no way they were letting that go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's sort of I think the highlights. I think we might have missed a handful. Like I think there's an Upwelling and Focus Thunder choice node that we didn't get a chance to talk
Right.
about.
So
But I think
so
in general, like what you're seeing, and this is sort of my biggest issue. I guess Unison too is another capstone, which we're not even gonna talk about because it's just terrible.
yeah.
Um,
It's gotten
but
better.
my it's yeah, kind of. But I think my biggest issue with the whole talent tree as we sort of think about this is it at the bottom you have Rising Mist and Invoker's Delight as capstones, which in general, the way that these trees are broken out is you can basically pick one or two capstones depending on how their talents break out. And those are two very strong ones. And it means
Right.
that if you want to get to the left to take, Feline Stomp, you're giving up a bunch of stuff in the middle to move points over there. And
Right.
stuff that, regardless of the type of content you're going to do, you're going to want to take anyway. So, in my mind, while the tree has a bunch of strong things in it, they're so focused or so sort of condensed in the center of the tree that, like, in my mind, there's like one build pathway, and then there's a bunch of concessions you make to take something you may want to play because you think it's fun, right? And like to take
Gotcha.
Phalanx Stomp, you're probably dropping Rising Mist, which I guess makes sense, but like to be fair, sort of sucks even in Mythic Plus. Or you're dropping like Invoker's Delight, which seems really bad to drop. Like I almost think like that whole invoke to to the cooldown reduction, give to the Celestial to Invokers is like almost a mandatory thing that you take in almost any build.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you sort of build around that, which is you're in the middle of the tree already, so breaking to the left and the right is difficult.
I think it would
Um,
be helped if like SI, for instance, instead branched off of Yulon's. Like they
Right.
could move some
yeah.
things around a bit so that it doesn't feel like because you almost always want to take a secret infusion.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like so it being directly in front of invokers just makes it like, oh, I do want to take this no matter what, anyways. So
Yeah.
you're gonna like there could be some things fixed by shifting it around. Like I think for the most part, the talents we've gotten are great and do help paint a picture for how we want to play, which has been a bit confusing for players since the Legion rework.
Mhm.
But there is still some work to do. Like I would like to see, like for instance, the Essence font stuff moved closer to where ancient teachings of the monastery is, like font of life and upwelling at that choice node be like on the left.
Right.
Maybe see Yulon's Whisper switch with Essence Font or with Font of Life, like where
Mhm.
Okay.
they're positioned on the tree, and then have Secret Infusion brought under it as a choice, or not a choice, but an option. Like it
Right.
might open up the branching a bit more, which from there it can branch into um, that mastery talent. I can't remember its name right now. Resplendent Mist.
Splendidness.
Like
Yeah.
that might make it so I don't have to take Bone Dust Brute if I do want extra mastery healing, because it being locked behind that feels bad. Some players might want it.
Right.
Right.
There's so one thing I'm noticing as I look at this is I went through kind of the we're getting infinite renewing mists build, right? And I picked
Yeah.
everything that was related to that, and I picked what I had to in order to make that work. And you end up with like 3 talent points left, and so that basically let me reach Phaline Stomp, but not take the additional stuff beyond that. And this is one of the things where like you don't necessarily need the stuff below Phaline Stomp if you're in a raid, because you're not like you don't need the AoE
Yeah.
in a lot of raid encounters, and at the same time you don't need the infinite renewing mists in keys. So maybe you sacrifice a bunch of that stuff in order to make, in order to pick Phaline Stomp and the Phaline Stomp, bonus effects below that. But
Yeah.
one of the issues
I
is that on
sorry.
the left side there's these like talents over here that you just like aren't taking, and that makes it harder to reach Phalanx Stump. Like
Yeah.
I only picked
Yeah,
up
and I think
Elon's Whisper in order to reach Phalanx Stump.
Yeah, and I think that's a function of some of those talents being like the talent trees themselves being a mix of content. So like to
Yeah.
me, like the nourishing chi and even calming coalescence, which we spent a lot of time on, those are definitely I think to me like PvP things that people would want to pick up.
Right.
So you're already like in that mind, you're sort of that's the function they hold. The problem is though, is that I don't
Yeah.
know in PvP if you want Phaline Stomp. So like you sort of end there and then you go in an entirely different direction. So it's sort of
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying is like I don't think there's bad talents on the tree. Like I think everything probably has its place,
Yeah.
other than the soothing mist talent that's at the bottom that we didn't even talk about, peaceful
Yeah.
mending. But I think in general they just the positioning can be better. You know, break
Okay.
up the middle a little bit, shift some things like to the left and the right sides, and sort of strengthen the fact that you want to take a wider view of the tree. Because today you could back down the middle and get everything you want, like everything you could want. Um, or you are specking down the middle because everything's so strong and you can't get to the stuff you want on the sides, right?
Right.
To what
Um,
you mentioned about the life cocoon talents and how you that's like all you want for PvP, like
yeah,
your choice for that stops there because Phaline stops below. That's
yeah,
where I think you could swap the Phaline stuff and the Bone Dust Brew stuff. Just port them
yeah,
to the other side of each other
Right.
because from my understanding, Bone Dust Brew is a lot better in PvP than other like it's very useful there
Yeah.
to
mhm,
do additional healing. So just that itself makes a more logical decision making, and then it might open up the right side of the tree a bit more to get to Phalanx Stomp because we're already taking rapid diffusion. So we don't have to go and take more awkward things to get to it in some weird way.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, no, for sure. But I mean, I think overall the tree itself does offer some is fun. Like it's not like it's not the doom and gloom tree we thought. Like it's not the hey,
Yeah.
this is going to be terrible. Like I think there at each talent point other than peaceful mending, I think there is like an actual like thing you'd want to the reason you'd want to try and take it, right?
Right.
Um I think the only thing that frustrates me are some of the soothing like is really peaceful mending and even calming
Unison.
coalescence in general and unison actually to be fair those two because and this will be my one thing about soothing mist is that it's such a slow gameplay option in a game that is now no longer slow. Right?
Yeah.
Like the idea of like taking unison and taking, peaceful mending and even taking which we didn't really talk about the class tree, but taking statue, Jade
Yeah.
Serpent statue,
Yeah.
like that gameplay is so slow in terms of like you heal a single target, even with unison, you heal two targets, which isn't great, right?
Yeah.
Over a slow trickle over 8 seconds. Like healing today is not done that way.
Yeah.
It's done very quickly because it's either bursty or there's a lot of damage going out, or it's done over a longer period of time where you don't want to spend time casting a like long channel. Like, I don't
Right.
know. Maybe it's just me, but like, I
There's
don't
an
want to sit there.
opportunity cost to sitting there
Yeah,
and
I don't want to.
channeling.
Exactly. And like, like there's stuff you may need to dodge from. You can't move in channel soothing. So that's going to break.
Yeah.
And to be fair, like the clouded focus buff itself only lasts while you're channeling, which I think maybe they should change. Like I think they can make soothing mist interesting if you're able to do other things while channeling it. And
Honestly, I
those other
think
things
the big thing
should
is
be
probably just movement, right?
well,
Yeah.
I mean movement's one of it to me, but I think the other thing too is it would be interesting if there was a world where soothing mist was something that just the statue did and
Okay.
you had an activator for it. So you spent a GCD to get it on something. It lasted a little bit longer than 8 seconds, but then it replicated some of what you were doing.
Yeah.
Like if you cast Zen Pulse on someone, it replicated a Zen Pulse on that person. If you casted Vivify or whatever, whatever the buffs are that can occur with it, it also sort of mirrored or mimicked that. Because I think Soothing Mist in general is just too slow
Right.
of a gameplay. And I think the only reason that we are even considered talking about it is because Clouded Focus is so good.
Right.
Right.
And I think
Like,
Yeah.
that's the kind of talent that makes the opportunity cost of sitting there and channeling for 8 seconds worthwhile, right? Whereas
exactly.
it gives you such potential burst that you're like
Mhm.
willing to deal with that cost of sitting there and channeling for 8 seconds. And there's really very few other scenarios where you're okay doing that.
Like even in current content, like I've spammed a lot of keys at the beginning of this season. Like I swapped to clouded focus because of how much random damage there are in older dungeons, along with
Hmm.
like how heavy the damage can be. That it does see a lot of. I've found a lot of use for it where I can't rely on ancient teachings of the monastery. That's why I like it paired as a choice because you get to
Mhm.
direct where you're pumping a lot of extra
Right.
healing too,
Okay.
instead of just hoping it cleaves onto somebody.
Right.
Um, but like one thing, maybe it would be like could be implemented, but like why not just add the movement portion of it onto Thunder Focus Tea? If you consume it with it, you get like I don't know versatility, and you can
Yeah.
channel it while soothing. Like just give us more reasons to just be smashing that button, like, maybe, like
Or
Thunder Focus
just
D. Like,
just make a
you might
baseline.
never use it, but the niche scenarios where you use it I feel like they don't wanna make it baseline, so I think it has to have some sort of
Yeah.
gate to it.
I
Like
guess if it's
Yeah.
baseline, the issue with it being baseline is that it's basically paying a mana tax to make all of your spells castable while moving.
yeah.
Is the issue.
Which from the, class tree, we now have Vivify that's castable while moving because it's instant cast, and
Right.
it's buffed up by 40%, so all of that helps feed into the
Right.
sort of build we're painting.
Yeah.
But if you do take Clouded Focus, it makes the instant cast Vivify redundant because
Yeah.
Soothing Mist already front loads your healing
Right.
for Vivify, so doesn't really
Yeah.
matter to take that point, but we have a lot of great stuff. It is awkward, like Anam saying, just fights are no longer designed for you to sit there and channel multiple globals into somebody.
Right.
But I think they're trying to make it. There's like slower gameplay where if you want to take it, if you're only a heroic raider, it might be a viable option. You can kill bosses with it if you want to stand in range. Like
Yeah.
that's what it feels like. It's there
Yeah.
like the lower down the tree talents, the capstone, for instance, the
It
unison.
is it is very strange looking at this tree and seeing how much of the tree is dedicated to basically two almost dead abilities in Soothing Mist and Essence Font, where
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
were obviously hugely important to the Legion rework, and they have slowly been getting extricated from the actual abilities that you push while raiding. Like you only push Essence
Yeah.
Font in some cases to turn on other talents.
Yeah.
Essence
Basically,
Essence Font's
Yeah.
bad. It's always been bad,
I just
but
it has. It looks pretty. Terrible ability.
yeah,
But
But
now
no, I
we
mean
can
it's
channel it faster, so that's
That's
cool.
true. We can with Thunder Focus. They did add that. Yeah, I mean, I think the my only final point on the tree, I think, is it looks really cool. The interesting thing to me is with all the with all like the replication of HOTS ideas of like Dancing Mist and
yeah,
rapid diffusion. It's actually starting to feel a lot like Hellfire Citadel, basically end of WAD style Mistweaver, which is,
okay,
to be fair, like one of my favorite times of playing Mistweaver. And so it's interesting that that's like this was a route that I think in my sort of wowhead post that I wrote was like maybe they'll go this way, and it's like a pipe dream of like seeing something like this.
and then it
But there's
actually
sort of
showed up.
it's starting to, I mean, it's starting
Yeah,
to feel a lot like that in terms of, the idea of as a healer, our focus is on, spreading our hots over the course of a raid as best we can, and then blasting with like Vivify or, setting
right,
up some sort of ramp, which is a interesting part of the gameplay. And they've also
right,
kept intact though that damage focus piece of it, which I think is
yes,
cool. And Phaline and sort of ancient teaching still be there. But I think I guess, so that's sort of, I'm excited about it. I think the only thing that I'm going to try and do this whole entire expansion is kill the idea that you should never be outside of melee range, right? The idea is like, as a Mistweaver, you just sit in melee range. And if you happen to cast the majority, like the maintenance healing that you do is mostly casts, then you're a quote unquote caster. And if the maintenance healing you do is mostly just kicking and punching through ancient teachings and Phaline,
right,
you're just a melee healer. But I think that's going to be the biggest distinction that I think you should look at from a Mistweaver perspective is like, what is your
yeah,
maintenance healing? And then what are your bursts going to be? And like,
Yeah. You
yeah,
should always be standing in melee. Doesn't
yeah,
matter if you're kicking or casting, you're in
yeah.
melee.
right. Because you still
Um,
have to use Rising Sun Kick for a number of different triggers.
yeah.
Or to stun or to interrupt because we get an interrupt now.
Right,
Like
it's a melee interrupt. Yeah,
all of that occurs while you're in melee. So I mean, like the majority of what you're outside of just healing things or doing damage things you do are going to be things you want to be in melee to do anyway.
right,
Um,
Yeah.
so no,
The like biggest thing that like stood out to me about the talent tree overall, like I feel like if you're a good Mistweaver, you can utilize a lot of these talents to an extreme degree. Like there's more skill expression in our tree that's available, just like the like moment to moment decision making on like how you're going to use your Thunder Focus Tea because
right,
Secret Infusion is now back. Am I going to go to crit? Am I going to go to verse? Do I get the second rise in Sun Kick, or would I rather benefit from a stat here? like a different stat than verse. Like there's different things in the tree that you can show like as a player how much better of an understanding you have of the class as a whole
Right.
and play it better than just like, oh, I'm not interacting with frames, I'm putting out hots, rising sun kick, RJW's on,
Yeah.
I repeat the cycle, I hit Fallen Order. Like
Right.
all that, even though it did a lot of healing, like taking the top performing monk to like the 10th top performing monk, they're playing basically the same way. It's more of a like, did you get better RNG on your Fallen Order?
Right.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
notable absence from the tree. Fallen
It's
Order.
great.
I wanted that reworked into like Yulon. That's what I was spouting about the entire time on Discord. Like some version of it, like just make Yulon better in that way, but
I'm
it's
very
fine.
happy to see it
That is
gone.
gone.
Fallen
Yeah. No,
Order. Backstreet Boys did not come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have been fine with getting no covenants, honestly.
I
like
would have
that.
too, actually. I would have been fine not seeing any of them. I think that they didn't have, well, at least on the Brewmaster side, they wanted to give us a cooldown and they did not have a lot of options. So that really motivated Weapons of Order coming back, I think. But
Yeah.
that's a topic for a future episode. And we are a
Yes,
little bit over time. So we are going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Thank you for joining us, Drez, to talk about the Mistweaver Talents. This is actually
thank you,
really
man.
exciting. There's like a clear role I see that, you know, as we're looking at comps for Dragonflight, we could see Mistweaver fitting into where they are going to like have a lot of potential throughput just all the time, kind of like or end of Sanctum kind of tier.
Yep.
So very exciting. Looking forward to seeing how that pans out in Dragonflight. Hopefully it doesn't get gutted.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But
I have about 2 hours more of notes of like this is how they should probably change us so we're not fully gutted and still usable, but it's
yeah.
It's a lot.
It's
a
spooky
lot.
potentially.
But that is going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for watching and or listening. And if you enjoyed the show and you want to support it and the work that we do over at the Peak of Serenity, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. Brew Lounge reverted back to its, I think, at this point, natural state of being F1 Lounge.
F1, baby!
Anomoly making the rare appearance in Brew Lounge to talk F1.
Yeah, I said hello. I said hello earlier. My boy Max won. Crushed it today. So
I don't know who Max is.
World champion, world driver champion, Max Verstappen? Come on, my friends.
It's a debatable championship.
The GOAT, by the way.
Anyway, that is going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.